Today is Monday, April 13th. This is VOA's International Edition. I'm Lori Lunden in Washington. Coming up, the world celebrates Easter at a distance as Pope Francis calls for solidarity.
In questa notte è risuonata la voce della Chiesa. Cristo, mia speranza è risorto.
Another sad milestone for New York City. Also ahead, opera star Andrea Bocelli gives a moving performance in Milan's empty Duomo. It's all on today's International Edition. Pope Francis addressed a world severely tested by the coronavirus, saying, "This is not a time for indifference because everyone is suffering and must be united." In his Easter message, he said that for many, this is a time of worry about an uncertain future, about jobs that are at risk, and about other consequences of the current crisis. Sabina Castelfranco has more from Rome.
Indifference, egoismo, divisione, dimenticanza.
Pope Francis said indifference, self-centeredness, division and forgetfulness are not words we want to hear at this time. We want to ban these words forever. Delivering his Easter Urbi et Orbi message to the city and to the world in an empty St. Peter's Basilica at the gates of confession, the Pope's words this Easter resounded more strongly than ever. He said the world is now oppressed by a pandemic, severely testing our whole human family. After celebrating Easter Mass with a very limited number of attendants and without the faithful in St. Peter's Basilica, in his message, the Pope's first thoughts went to the many who have been directly affected by the coronavirus.
Ai malati, a coloro che sono morti e ai familiari che piangono.
The sick, the Pope said, those who have died and family members who mourn the loss of their loved ones, to whom in some cases they were unable even to bid a final farewell. The 83-year-old Pope said this is an Easter of solitude, lived amid the sorrow and hardship that the pandemic is causing, from physical suffering to economic difficulties. This disease, he added, has not only deprived people of human closeness, but also of the possibility of receiving consolation from the sacraments in person. Francis expressed gratitude and affection toward the doctors and nurses who work to exhaustion and not infrequently at the expense of their own health.
In queste settimane la vita di milioni di persone.
In these weeks, Francis said, the lives of millions of people have suddenly changed. For many, he said, remaining at home has been an opportunity to reflect, to withdraw from the frenetic pace of life, stay with loved ones and enjoy their company. However, for many, he continued, this is also a time of worry about an uncertain future, about jobs at risk, and about other consequences of the current crisis. This is not a time for indifference, the Pope said, because the whole world is suffering and needs to be united in facing the pandemic. He encouraged political leaders to work for the common good and to provide the means and resources needed for everyone to lead a dignified life. In light of the present circumstances, the Pope called for international sanctions to be relaxed, since they make it difficult for targeted countries to provide adequate support to their citizens. Saying this is not a time for self-centeredness, the Pope offered special thoughts for Europe. After World War II, he said, Europe could rise again thanks to a concrete spirit of solidarity that enabled it to overcome the rivalries of the past. The European Union is facing an epochal challenge, he said, on which not only its future, but that of the whole world will depend. The Pope said it is more urgent than ever now that these rivalries do not regain force, but that all recognize themselves as part of a single family and support each other. Sabina Castelfranco for VOA News, Rome.
Easter Sunday did go on around the world with virtual church services and gatherings as uncertainty continues as to what the next few weeks and even months will look like. The United States death toll is the world's highest, with over 555,000 cases and more than 22,000 deaths. New York City has over 100,000 confirmed cases. Governor Andrew Cuomo this weekend said hospitalizations and deaths are stabilizing, but things continue to be grim.
Stabilizing, but it is stabilizing at an horrific rate. 783 people, 777, 799. These are just incredible numbers, depicting incredible loss and pain.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been discharged from a London hospital where he was treated in intensive care for the coronavirus, as the UK became the fourth European country to surpass 10,000 virus-related deaths. AP correspondent Zuria Shackley reports.
Johnson's office said he left St Thomas's Hospital and will continue his recovery at the Prime Minister's country house. The statement said on the advice of his medical team, the PM will not be immediately returning to work. He wishes to thank everybody at St Thomas's for the brilliant care he has received. Johnson had been in the hospital for a week and had spent 3 nights in the intensive care unit. He said he owes his life to the National Health Service medical workers who treated him. Johnson, 55 years old, was the first world leader confirmed to have the illness. Zuria Shackley, London.
A top European Union official says it's too early to plan summer vacations for July and August. But hotspots in the coronavirus pandemic have shifted constantly, and new concerns are rising in Japan, Turkey, the U.S. Midwest, and Britain. More than 100,000 people have died worldwide from the novel coronavirus. Russia and other oil-producing nations have finalized an unprecedented production cut of nearly 10 million barrels, or a tenth of global supply, in hopes of boosting crashing prices amid the coronavirus pandemic and a price war. Fuel price analyst Trilby Lundberg says global demand for oil has dried up so much that OPEC's production cuts are likely to have little impact.
There are calculations that a 10 million barrels per day decline in output from OPEC and its partners would be only about 1/3 of what would be needed to supply and demand balance.
The group of nations agreed on a video conference Sunday to cut 9.7 million barrels a day to begin May 1st. The coronavirus pandemic has upended the U.S. legal system, with courthouses closed, thousands of trials on hold, and legal deadlines not being met. The public health crisis could leave people lingering behind bars and build a legal backlog. Joining us to talk about it is criminal defense attorney Jack Rice. Jack, is this a situation where we could see a backlog that just completely overwhelms the court system? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's turned the court system upside down and shook it. I've watched this in my own practice. I was in a courtroom just yesterday, and we're arguing these issues. I mean, one of the things that happens now is we have to address certain kinds of cases, people who are held in custody because they were just arrested. They have to have appearances. That's one example of several that have to be addressed. A whole bunch of the others have been simply pushed off with no actual dates for when things will start back up.
So a lot of judges across the country are postponing trials and in-person hearings?
Yeah, no question about it. I've seen this in both federal and state court. And in fact, I have a case right now, which is a murder trial for a client who's in custody, has been waiting for a trial with a speedy trial demand. And he's in segregation, and he's been waiting for months now for a trial. I'm trying to get him out, and the court keeps saying no.
Now, if all this stuff gets delayed, what will things look like post-COVID-19?
It's a wonderful question. In fact, I've been thinking about that. Generally, the court systems, all of them, are underfunded, and so they're always operating by the tips of their fingers. They're just barely keeping above water. Now, let's contemplate driving everything to a screaming halt, holding it there for 2 or 3 months, and then pouring that on top of everything else that's going to come right afterward. This could be cataclysmic.
And the cases that are being heard, my understanding is that some judges are holding hearings on the phone or video chats, and I know you've had a recent experience with that.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I had a sentencing just this week where I had a client who was there to be sentenced, and he was in custody, and the obligation is that the victim has the right to come in and testify. However, the rules don't allow for citizens, if you will, victims, to come into a courtroom setting at this point. So she literally called me on my cell phone. We FaceTimed. I put my cell phone up to the microphone so it could go on the record. This is all being done, by the way, as I have my hands wrapped in rubber gloves and I have a mask around my face so I look like a 1930s bank robber.
You know, and then you talk about the safety issue, people that are being held and potential for them to have the virus or spread the virus, or, of course, in a case like you as an attorney having to be in court in certain situations, there's always the risk all the way around.
There are more than 2.3 million people being held in custody in the United States right now. About 500,000 of those people are simply being held because they can't post bail. What we have seen across the U.S. is a lot of courts are trying to cut as many people loose as they can because they're very conscious of this issue. But there are some people who simply can't be released. And you're right, all of those people who are involved in the system, I'm talking about judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, court administrators, deputies, everybody involved, they're exposing themselves because they have no choice. I mean, this is what we do. I wrap my hands in gloves, I wrap a scarf around my face, and I step into the court system. I step into a jail cell, and I got a client sitting right across from me. Are we 6 feet apart? No, but what else are we going to do?
And when this is all over and everything's all backed up, I wonder if prosecutors will have to think about abandoning some of the lower level cases just to keep it from flooding the legal system.
Boy, that's a wonderful thought and a wonderful question, I should say, because what I've thought of, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, is one of the things we expect is that there may very well be what we would call a fire sale, meaning everybody is overwhelmed. Nobody can keep up with the number of cases. And so therefore, there's going to be a lot of motivation to resolve a whole bunch of cases very quickly. And a lot of people are getting ready for that.
That was criminal defense attorney Jack Rice. Thanks so much for being with us. Here are some of the other stories we are following at VOA. Healthcare facilities in Japan are becoming overwhelmed amid a surge in new coronavirus patients. Several Japanese medical organizations have issued a statement warning of a potential collapse of the medical system. They describe hospitals turning people away, including those rushed by ambulance with strokes, heart attacks, and external injuries. Some of those turned away have later tested positive for the virus. Health officials there say personal protective equipment is also running low. Japan has nearly 7,000 coronavirus cases, and the numbers are growing. The Taliban has announced it will be releasing 20 Afghan government prisoners. The group has been holding in the first phase of its commitment under its historic peace deal with the United States. The deal calls for the government to release 5,000 Taliban prisoners in exchange for 1,000 government officials held by Taliban insurgents. The Afghan government released its first 100 Taliban prisoners last week, and it says it has already freed 300 overall. The peace deal is aimed at paving the way for the U.S. to extricate itself from the 19-year war, America's longest. And in its efforts to slow the spread of coronavirus, Israel is tightening quarantine rules in vulnerable areas of Jerusalem, including the historic Old City. Residents in 4 predominantly ultra-Orthodox areas will only be allowed to leave their neighborhoods for essential work and medical care. Israel has reported about 10,000 cases of coronavirus. Roughly a fifth of all cases in the country are in Jerusalem. Stay with VOA for all the latest on the coronavirus pandemic.